Ambassador Han Sol walked through the massive crystal corridors of the Galactic Council building. The walls sparkled like diamonds, reaching so high you couldn't see the ceiling. Alien voices echoed everywhere, clicking sounds, musical tones, and deep rumbles that made his chest vibrate. This was where the galaxy's most important decisions were made, and humans were barely welcome here. "Look, the pet Deathworlders are back," whispered a tall, blue-skinned creature to his friend. They didn't bother hiding their laughter. Han Sol had heard worse, much worse. The human section was tucked away in a corner, with only 12 seats compared to the hundreds given to other species. Earth had joined the Galactic Council just 15 years ago, and most aliens still saw humans as violent cavemen who'd somehow learned to build spaceships. They called Earth a death world because the gravity was too strong, the weather too harsh, and the animals too dangerous for civilized species to survive there. "Attention, Council members," announced the session leader, a creature that looked like a walking tree with too many eyes. "Today we discuss trade route security in the Vega system." Han Sol straightened in his seat. This was important. Human cargo ships used those routes daily, carrying supplies to the outer colonies, where families were trying to build new lives. But as usual, no one asked for the human opinion. The discussion dragged on for hours. Different species argued about patrol schedules and protection fees. The Zenthari wanted to charge more for security. The Veltari thought twice-monthly patrols were enough. Everyone had an opinion except the humans. What none of them knew was that Captain J1's security fleet was already quietly protecting those routes. 3 human destroyers moved like ghosts through the shipping lanes, stopping pirates before they could strike, and resolving disputes before they became battles. The other species thought their own diplomatic talks had made space safe. They had. No idea human blood was keeping the peace. "The barbarians are so quiet today," joked Councillor Zextal during a break. "Usually they're demanding to fight someone by now." Minister Kyung Mi, sitting beside Han Sol, clenched her fists under the table. She'd spent 10 years trying to earn respect in these halls. Her doctorate in xenobiology meant nothing here. Her successful negotiations with 3 different species were forgotten. All they saw was a human. Dangerous, primitive, useful only. For violence. The session finally ended with another decision made without human input. As the other species filed out, chattering in their various languages, Han Sol remained seated. Through the massive windows, he could see the lights of the galactic capital stretching toward the horizon. Millions of beings from hundreds of worlds, all living in peace. They thought their civilization was built on superior wisdom and advanced technology. They believed their diplomatic skills and ancient cultures made them better than the crude humans from that dangerous little planet called Earth. What they didn't understand was that their peaceful galaxy existed because someone was willing to do the dirty work. Someone was handling the problems too dangerous or too ugly for civilized species to touch. Someone was standing guard in the darkness while they slept safely in their beds. That someone was human. And sooner or later, the galaxy would learn what happened when the Guardians stopped guarding. Captain J1 was drinking his morning coffee when the emergency alarm screamed through his ship. The hot liquid splashed across his uniform as he jumped up, but he didn't care. That alarm only meant one thing: someone was dying. "Captain, to the bridge now." Lieutenant Sora's voice cracked through the speakers. She never sounded scared. But today was different. J1 ran through the corridors of the Soul's Pride, his boots echoing off the metal walls. His crew was already at battle stations, their faces tight with worry. Through the ship's windows, he could see the black emptiness of space stretching toward the outer rim colonies. "Report," he barked as he reached the bridge. "We're getting a distress signal from New Busan colony," Sora said, her fingers flying over her control panel. "Multiple ships attacking. Big ones, sir." The main screen flickered to life, showing a live feed from the colony. J1's blood turned to ice. 12 massive warships hung in space above the peaceful farming settlement, like metal vultures. These weren't pirates or raiders. This was the Hegemony Alliance, and they'd brought enough firepower to level a planet. "Dear God," whispered his communications officer, "they're targeting civilian areas." On the screen, bright flashes lit up the colony's surface. The school where Minister Kyung-mi was visiting disappeared in a ball of fire. The hospital where human doctors treated patients from 6 different species turned into a crater. Houses where families were eating breakfast simply vanished. "How long until we reach them?" J1 demanded. 3 hours at maximum speed, the navigator replied. 3 hours. J1 closed his eyes and listened to the screaming voices on the radio. Children crying for their parents, doctors begging for medical supplies that would never come, teachers trying to evacuate schools that no longer existed. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Hegemony flagship," Sora reported. The screen changed to show Admiral Kekstar, his scales gleaming under the bridge lights. His species looked like giant lizards, but their eyes held a cold intelligence that made them far more dangerous than any animal. "Human vessel," Kekstar said with mock politeness. "You are entering a restricted combat zone. Turn back immediately." "This is a peaceful colony," J1 replied, his voice deadly calm. "Those are civilians down there. These are criminals who violated hegemony space," Kekstar lied smoothly. "We are conducting a police action." Everyone knew it was nonsense. New Busan had been established with full galactic approval. The colony had never even had weapons beyond hunting rifles. But the hegemony didn't care about truth. They cared about sending a message. "Captain," Sora whispered, "we're outnumbered 12-1. J1 stared at the screen, watching his people die while he was helpless to stop it. The Soul's Pride was a patrol ship, built for rescue missions and anti-piracy work. Against 12 hegemony dreadnoughts, it would last about 30 seconds. By the time they arrived, New Busan was gone. 30,000 people reduced to ash and melted glass. The hegemony ships had already left, probably heading back to their space to celebrate a job well done. J1 walked through the ruins with tears, in his eyes stepping over the remains of playgrounds and schools. This wasn't war, it was murder. And somewhere in the galaxy, the civilized species would find a way to make it legal. The emergency session of the Galactic Council felt more like a funeral than a trial. Ambassador Han Sol sat in the human section, staring at the holographic images floating above the chamber floor. 30,000 faces looked back at him. Teachers, farmers, children, doctors, all dead, all reduced to statistics on a screen. "The Hegemony Alliance has provided compensation," announced Prime Councillor Thexeril, his voice echoing through the massive chamber. 50,000 credits per civilian casualty. This is a generous settlement that should satisfy all parties. Han Sol felt something cold settle in his stomach. 50,000 credits. He'd seen alien diplomats spend more than that on a single dinner. These were human lives they were talking about. Real people with families and dreams and futures that would never happen. Senator Hayrin grabbed his arm as he started to stand. She could feel him shaking, not with fear but with rage so pure it made the air around them feel electric. "Stay calm," she whispered. "Don't give them a reason to dismiss us." But Han Sol was already on his feet. The entire chamber fell silent, as 300 alien species turned to look at the angry human. Some looked curious, others annoyed that he was interrupting their important business. 50,000 credits, Han Sol repeated, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "For 30,000 lives. That's what you think we're worth." Councillor Zevthak of the Hegemony stood up with a theatrical sigh. He was tall and elegant, with silver skin that reflected the chamber's lights. To him, this was all just politics. "The amount is more than fair for what was essentially a border dispute," he said smoothly. "Your colony was built too close to our territory. Our colony was approved by this very council," shot back Senator Jin Woo from the gallery. "We have the documents. We followed every rule, every regulation." "Rules change," Zevthak replied with a shrug. "Borders shift. These things happen in a civilized galaxy." Han Sol looked around the chamber at faces that might as well have been carved from stone. These beings had watched the footage of children being burned alive, and all they could think about was maintaining their precious status quo. They saw 30,000 human deaths as an acceptable cost of doing business. "We understand this is emotional for your species," said Councillor Meltar in what he probably thought was a kind tone. "Humans are known for their passionate responses, But civilization requires compromise. We cannot allow raw feelings to dictate galactic policy. The vote was a formality. One by one, the species of the galaxy decided that the massacre of New Busan colony was worth exactly 50,000 credits per human life. Case closed. Moving on to the next item on their agenda. As the chamber erupted in discussions about trade regulations and mining rights, the human delegation sat in stunned silence. They had just learned exactly what their lives were worth to the civilized galaxy. They had discovered that all their years of trying to earn respect and acceptance meant nothing. Senator Hyrin watched her colleagues' faces change from shock to anger to something much more dangerous: cold determination. The galaxy had just taught humanity a lesson about the price of civilization. Soon, very soon, the bill would come due. Director Na Young had practiced this speech 100 times in her mirror back on Earth. She'd memorized every word, every pause, every gesture. But standing here in the emergency session chamber, facing 300 alien species who held the power to deliver justice or condemn her people to worthlessness, her hands trembled as she activated the holographic display. The faces appeared one by one. Little Minnie, age 7, who wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Teacher Dongwoo, who'd spent his life savings to buy supplies for the colony school. Dr. Yon Ho, who delivered over 200 babies on New Busan, including alien children whose parents had sought human medical care. "These are not numbers on a report," Na Young began, her voice steady despite the weight crushing her chest. "These were people. They had names, dreams, families who loved them. They were building something beautiful on New Busan, a place where humans and aliens could live together in peace." She clicked to the next image, the colony's main street before the attack. Children of 5 different species played together in the park. A Zenthari family ran the bakery next to a human grocery store. Veltari students attended classes taught by human teachers who'd learned their complex language just to help them succeed. "We're not asking for revenge," Na Young continued, looking directly at Prime Councillor Thexerol. "We're not demanding blood for blood. We're asking for something much simpler, for you to acknowledge that human lives have the same value as any other life in this chamber." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Na Young could hear her own heartbeat echoing in the vast space. 300 pairs of alien eyes stared back at her, and in most of them she saw nothing but polite indifference. Councillor Merthak was the first to respond, his voice gentle but dismissive. "We understand your grief, Director Na Young. The loss of life is always tragic, but we must consider the broader implications of any action we take." Broader implications? Senator Jin Woo stood up in the gallery, his voice cracking with emotion. 30,000 people are dead and you're worried about implications. "The hegemony provides crucial trade routes and military support," explained Councillor Vexelen patiently, as if talking to a child. "Destabilizing their government could affect billions of lives across hundreds of systems. Surely you see that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few." Na Young felt something break inside her chest. They were using the deaths of her people as a math problem. 30,000 humans versus the economic inconvenience of holding the hegemony accountable. "Your species is known for emotional responses," added Councillor Zelmar with what he believed was kindness. "It's understandable. You evolved on a dangerous world where quick anger meant survival. But civilization requires us to think beyond our primitive instincts." One by one, the alien species explained why nothing more could be done. The precedent was too dangerous. The hegemony was too economically important. The stability of the galaxy was too precious to risk over what they saw as a minor territorial dispute. Na Young listened to each excuse, feeling her faith in galactic civilization die a little more with every word. She'd spent 20 years believing that intelligence and wisdom guided the Council's decisions. Now she realized that cowardice and self-interest were the real powers here. When the session ended, she walked from the chamber with perfect diplomatic composure, even though her world had just collapsed around her. The message arrived at exactly midnight Earth Standard Time across every human outpost in the galaxy. 3 simple words that would change everything. Come home now. Colonel Dong Hyun was teaching Veltari soldiers how to disable explosive devices when his wrist communicator buzzed. He read the message twice, then looked up at his alien students who were hanging on his every word. For 3 years, he'd been training their planetary defense force, turning frightened civilians into capable peacekeepers. "Sir?" asked his second-in-command, Major Su Jin, who'd gotten the same message. "What about the training program? They're not ready to handle the border conflicts on their own." Dong Hyun looked at the Veltari soldiers, young beings who reminded him of his own daughter back on Earth. Without human training, they'd be slaughtered in their first real battle. But orders were orders. "Pack everything," he said quietly. "We leave in 12 hours. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on 1,000 different worlds. Captain Young-ho shut down the humanitarian mission on Kepler-7, where his medical teams had been fighting a deadly plague for 8 months. Dr. Un Jung had been so close to finding a cure, just a few more weeks of research. Now the alien. Patients would have to face the disease alone. "But the children in Ward 7 won't survive without the treatment," Dr. Un Jung protested, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the tiny alien patients who'd become like family to her. "I know," Young-ho replied, his voice breaking, "but we have to go." Ambassador Tae-min walked into the Diplomatic Security Committee and placed his resignation on the table without a word. For 5 years, he'd been the one preventing trade disputes from becoming shooting wars. His quiet negotiations in smoky backrooms had stopped 12 conflicts before they started. The other diplomats didn't even know most of those wars had been brewing. Detective Subin closed her files with the Interspecies Crime Division, leaving behind cases that would never be solved. She'd been tracking a slavery ring that spanned 6 systems. Without human investigators who understood both alien psychology and criminal behavior, thousands of victims would remain trapped forever. The civilian contractors received the same message. Engineer Wu Jin had been upgrading security systems on the major trade routes, making space travel safe for merchant ships from dozens of species. His work had reduced piracy by 80% in the Outer Rim. Now those routes would become hunting grounds again. Scientist Min Jung deleted her research files from the Galactic Medical Database, years of work on diseases that affected multiple species. Her breakthrough on Zenthari bone disease would die with her departure. Her vaccine for the Kepler plague would never see distribution. Within 72 hours, humans began disappearing from galactic civilization like morning mist. No dramatic speeches, no angry declarations, no threats or ultimatums. They simply packed their belongings and left. Most alien species barely noticed at first. The few who did assumed humanity was having some kind of diplomatic tantrum that would blow over in a few weeks. After all, humans needed the galaxy more than the galaxy. Needed humans, right? The Galactic Council building felt strangely empty without the human delegation, but business continued as usual. Trade agreements were signed, territorial disputes were discussed, and the great work of civilization carried on. Nobody realized that the Guardians had just walked away from their posts. The first sign of trouble came 6 weeks after the humans disappeared. Trade route Sigma-7 had always been the safest passage between the Altarian homeworld and their mining colonies. Merchant ships loaded with precious metals made the journey daily, their crews so comfortable they barely bothered with security protocols. Then the pirates returned. Captain Velthar was hauling a cargo of rare crystals when his ship's alarms started screaming. 3 raider vessels surrounded his merchant cruiser like hungry wolves. He hadn't seen pirates on this route in over 5 years. "This is impossible," he stammered into his radio. "Sigma-7 is a protected zone." The raider captains' laughter crackled through the speakers. "Protected by who, little merchant? Your human pets went home, remember?" Velthar's cargo was gone within an hour. His crew was left floating in escape pods, waiting for rescue that took 3 days to arrive. Word spread quickly through the merchant networks. The safe routes weren't safe anymore. Director Kexhal of the Galactic Trade Commission stared at his reports with growing confusion. Piracy incidents had jumped from almost 0 to over 50 per week. Trade insurance costs were skyrocketing. Entire shipping lanes that had been secure for years were now no-go zones. "When did we last patrol Sigma-7?" he asked his aide, a nervous, Zenthari, whose scales were turning pale with stress. "We don't patrol it, sir. The humans handled all of Sigma 7 and sectors 12 through 19, and most of the outer rim." The revelation hit Kexhal like a physical blow. He pulled up the security records, his hands shaking as the truth emerged. The patrol schedules showed massive gaps, areas that had been marked as externally secured without anyone bothering to ask who was doing the securing. General Vextar discovered the same horrifying pattern when border skirmishes started erupting across known space. The Teresian and Morthak had been fighting over a mining system for decades, but their conflict had stayed peaceful for the last 10 years. Now they were shooting at each other again. "Sir," his intelligence chief reported, "our peacekeeping records show this sector was handled by human negotiators." "What human negotiators?" Vextar demanded. "We don't employ human negotiators." But they did. Or rather, the humans had been doing the job without being asked, working in the shadows to prevent conflicts before they exploded into violence. Lieutenant Sujin had been meeting secretly with both sides for months, finding compromises that let everyone save face. Her departure had left a powder keg with no one to defuse it. The pattern was everywhere once they started. Looking. The special operations teams that handled impossible rescues, 90% human. The crisis negotiators who talked down terrorist situations, mostly human. The technical experts who kept the galaxy's infrastructure running, human contractors. Who'd worked for free just to help. Even the Galactic Council's own security was compromised. Detective Subin's cases were falling apart without her expertise. The slavery ring she'd been tracking had already disappeared, moving their operations into the chaos left by absent human law enforcement. "They were doing everything," whispered Councillor Murthak as he read through file after file of human involvement in galactic affairs. All the dangerous jobs, all the thankless work, all the problems we didn't want to handle ourselves. The galaxy had thought it was civilized and peaceful because of superior wisdom and ancient diplomatic traditions. The truth was far more embarrassing. They'd been safe because someone else was willing to do the dirty work while they took credit for the results. Now the Guardians were gone, and the galaxy was remembering what chaos looked like. Minister Jae-hoon sat in his office on Earth, watching the galaxy tear itself apart on his holographic displays. Red warning lights blinked across star maps that had been peaceful green just months ago. Each light represented thousands of lives lost, millions of beings displaced, entire civilizations crumbling into chaos. "How many active conflicts now?" asked President Mi Young during their daily briefing. She looked tired, they all did. Watching the galaxy burn while staying safely at home was harder than anyone had expected. 17 major wars, 43 border skirmishes, and over 200 piracy incidents per month, reported Intelligence Director Kyung-soo, his voice flat with exhaustion. Last month it was basically zero. The holographic display showed the 7th Colonial War reigniting after 40 years of peace. The Zenthari and Veltari were slaughtering each other over mining rights that human negotiators had quietly resolved. Every few months, without Captain Na-yun's patrol ships keeping the peace, old hatreds had exploded back to life. The Teresian border dispute just went nuclear, Kyung-soo continued. 300,000 civilian casualties in the first week. President Mi-young closed her eyes. She remembered Lieutenant Dong Min, who'd spent 2 years living on the border, learning both languages and cultures, finding ways for the two species to coexist. His departure had left a vacuum that was now filled with radiation and corpses. The economic damage was even worse than the wars. Trade routes that had been safe for decades were now hunting grounds for pirates who'd emerged from whatever holes they'd been hiding in. The Altarian Crystal Express, once the most profitable shipping lane in known space, had lost 37 cargo ships in 6 weeks. Insurance companies are refusing to cover anything beyond core world routes, reported economic advisor So Young. The galactic economy is collapsing sector by sector, but the humanitarian crises cut deepest of all. The plague on Kepler-7 had mutated without human medical intervention, spreading to 6 neighboring systems. Dr. Yoon-jung's research could have stopped it, but her files had been deleted when she left. Now entire species faced extinction from a disease humans could have cured. Natural disasters went unrelieved across the galaxy. The earthquake on Morthak Prime had killed 2 million beings who could have been saved if human rescue teams had still been operating. The Zenthari refugee crisis grew worse every day, without human aid workers to distribute supplies and maintain order in the camps. The Hegemony Alliance is expanding again, Kyung-Soo reported grimly. They've absorbed 6 systems this month. No one's stopping them. Of course, no one was stopping them. Colonel Dong-hyun's covert operations teams had been the invisible force keeping the Hegemony's ambitions in check. His special forces had been conducting secret missions that prevented wars before they started, eliminating threats so quietly that most governments never knew they'd been in danger. The Galactic Council was calling emergency sessions every day, but talking was all they knew how to do. They'd spent so long taking credit for peace that they'd forgotten how to actually create it. Their diplomatic solutions worked fine when someone else was handling the real problems behind the scenes. Perhaps we should consider limited intervention, suggested Foreign Minister Chang Ho during one particularly grim briefing. No, President Mi Young replied firmly. They made their choice. They decided our lives weren't worth protecting. Now they get to live with the consequences. The galaxy was learning what happened when the Guardians went home. The delegation from the Galactic Council looked nothing like the proud, arrogant beings who had dismissed human lives just 1 year ago. Prime Councillor Thexral's usually perfect robes were wrinkled and stained. His homeworld was under siege by hegemony forces, and his people were dying while he begged for help from the species he'd once called primitive. Secretary General Boram met them in the same conference room where humanity had once pleaded for justice. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Lunar Station, which had once buzzed with galactic diplomacy, now felt like a fortress. Earth space was the only safe haven left in a galaxy gone mad. "We need your help," Thexral said without his usual diplomatic flourishes. Desperation had stripped away his polite pretenses. The hegemony has destroyed 3 of our colony worlds. Our children are starving in refugee camps. Foreign Minister Chang Ho sat quietly, his hands folded on the table. Behind him, holographic displays showed the carnage spreading across known space. 17 wars, hundreds of dead worlds, billions of refugees with nowhere to go. We understand. Now, pleaded Councillor Veltar, whose elegant species was facing extinction, we didn't realize what you were doing for us. We thought peace came naturally. You didn't realize what? Asked Director So Young, her voice deadly calm. That we were the only thing standing between you and the chaos you're experiencing now. Or that your precious civilization only existed because we were willing to bleed for it. The delegates tried everything. They offered Earth entire star systems, advanced technology that had been jealously guarded for centuries, trade agreements. That would make humanity the richest species in the galaxy. They promised equal representation in the Council, recognition of human superiority, statues of human heroes in every capital city. Please, Councillor Merthak whispered, tears streaming down his face. My grandchildren are trapped on Kepler Station. The hegemony will execute them if we don't surrender our homeworld. Jungmin, Earth's defense minister, finally stood and walked to the massive windows overlooking Luna's surface. Beyond the moon's horizon, Earth hung like a blue jewel. In the darkness, peaceful, protected, untouched by the violence consuming the galaxy. 30,000 humans died on New Busan, he said quietly. Children playing in schoolyards, doctors treating patients, teachers reading stories, and you offered us 50,000 credits and told us to stop being so emotional. He turned to face the desperate aliens. You taught us something valuable that day. You taught us exactly how much our lives are worth to galactic civilization. We were wrong, Thexeral cried out. We see that now. Human lives are precious, more precious than any others. You're the guardians of peace, the protectors of the innocent. Now you say that, replied Secretary General Boram. When your worlds are burning and your children are dying. When the hegemony is doing to you what they did to us. Suddenly human lives matter when you need human soldiers to save you. The delegation left Lunar Station empty-handed, their ships disappearing into the darkness toward a galaxy that no longer offered them sanctuary. Behind them, Humanity watched from their fortress of Earth, safe and isolated, while the civilization that had rejected them collapsed into barbarism. The reckoning had come at last. The galaxy was learning the true cost of dismissing those who had protected them in silence. 10 years had passed since the galaxy learned what happened when humans stopped being nice. Ambassador Han Sol stood once again in the Galactic Council chambers, but everything had changed. His hair was grey now, his face lined with the weight of decisions that had reshaped known space. Where 300 species once gathered in arrogant splendor, barely 100 remained independent. The rest had either been conquered by the Hegemony Alliance or had voluntarily placed themselves under human protection. The choice was simple: accept Earth's terms or face extinction alone. The chamber itself looked different too. The human section now occupied the center, with comfortable seats for 50 representatives. Other species sat in smaller sections arranged around them, their delegates speaking only when humans gave them permission. The mighty had fallen far. The Terran Federation agrees to guarantee the independence of the Altarian Republic, announced the new Prime Counselor, a Veltari who owed his position to human support. All humanitarian accords must be followed completely. Any violations will result in immediate withdrawal of protection. Han Sol watched how the chamber reacted to every word from Earth's representatives. The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by desperate attention. Species that had once called humans primitive barbarians now hung on every syllable, hoping for mercy. Captain Na-Un commanded the Federation Navy from her flagship, the New Busan's Revenge. The name wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. When her task force appeared in a system, wars ended immediately. Pirate fleets surrendered without firing a shot. Even the mighty Hegemony Alliance had learned to fear the sight of human warships. "Admiral," reported her communications officer, "the Zenthari are requesting assistance with their refugee crisis." "Tell them we'll consider it," Na-Un replied, "after they release the war criminals from the Teresian conflict and pay full reparations to the victim families." The Zenthari would comply. They always did now. The alternative was facing their problems alone, and the galaxy had learned that nobody survived alone anymore. Minister Kyung-mi ran the Department of Species Relations from her office on Earth. Every day, alien ambassadors lined up outside her door, waiting hours for a few minutes of her time. These were the same beings who had once refused to acknowledge her expertise, who had called her primitive and emotional. "The Morthak delegation is here," her assistant announced. Kyung-mi didn't look up from her reports. "Tell them I'm busy. They can wait like everyone else." The legend lived on across the galaxy in 1,000 different forms. Parents told their children about the day the Deathworlders stopped playing nice. Military academies studied it as the greatest strategic withdrawal in galactic history. Diplomats whispered it in council chambers as a reminder that power without compassion was worthless, but compassion without power was meaningless. On Earth, monuments honored the 30,000 who died on New Busan. Their sacrifice had taught humanity a crucial lesson. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away and let others discover what they've lost. The galaxy was safe again, but on human terms. Peace existed because humans chose to maintain it, not because ancient civilizations had earned it through wisdom. The Guardians had returned, but they would never again be taken for granted. The Deathworlders had stopped playing nice, and the universe would never forget why that mattered.